So in terms of messaging, then on the other side as well, we have Russia with its own propaganda and media arms.
Right, which they're very skillful at, very skillful.
So let me ask then. At the beginning of the war, Putin gave his reasons for entering Ukraine.
Right.
So for instance, to protect Russian-speaking people, or the Ukrainians were Nazis, or whatever the original reasons were. And he also called it a special military operation. What is the thought process that goes into these choices of words? Why? What is Putin balancing when he calls it a special military operation, and why has what we don't hear in the media anymore, this talk of Nazis in Ukraine? This is sort of quieted down a little bit. So what goes behind these choices?
Well, of course, if we knew that, we'd be a lot further than we were. Nobody has ever quite figured out what the Russian thought patterns are. But we have some clues, and the Russian thought patterns are: one, that they feel surrounded by enemies.
Mm-hmm.
Two, that they have never really developed a modern, liberal, tolerant society. When decisions are taken, they are forced through. They are not consulted. They are not agreed. They are forced through. Their relationship with their neighbors is one of domination, not of partnership. And so with Ukraine, which has nearly 50 million people, it's quite a large country on European standards. They probably couldn't, Putin himself, who has his own special psychology, which we've read a lot about in the newspapers, he probably couldn't just bear the thought that this 50 million Russians, as he saw them, were outside Russian control. Mm-hmm. Secondly, he became clearly quite agitated by the fact that the former Soviet republics along his southern and western border all wanted to join the West. This to him was not just a question of security, but it was a question of the prestige of Russian society. Why is it that the Georgians and the Armenians and the Ukrainians and the Kazakhs and the Azerbaijanis and everybody want to join the West and not our wonderful Russian community? This apparently drove him crazy. So that we know these facts, how he and his leadership put them together. There are other people who say, that's all nice, your analysis is nice, but the real consideration was that he has amassed billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars worth of wealth. And he was worried that the instability along the Russian southern and western border was going to undermine his own wealth, and that there might even be a domestic political movement against him. Other people have pointed to the 1912 election, so-called election, when he returned to office after having been prime minister for 4 years to make sure he followed the principles of the Russian Constitution, and that there was great anger at him coming back after 4 years. And then that's the time when it's about the time when his messaging changed from being somebody who wanted to be a partner of the West to being somebody who felt threatened by the West. So the threat to him was not so much NATO or an American or European attack, but rather it was the domestic political turning against him because of the attraction of the West. And
I see. So
all theories. I mean, there are lots of people who have spent much more time on this than I have. So I'm just giving you what I have read and what people who know more than I do think might be the reasons.
So if that is in fact true, it means that his messaging about feeling threatened by the expansion of NATO and so on, this is really just messaging for the public. It's not, if what you're saying is, I see.
That's right. And I might add that among the many things I did, I was there for a long time, as you know. I was also the lead American person on negotiating the so-called post-Cold War settlement with the Russians. Mm-hmm. I worked with NATO to think up the structures that we were going to have. I wrote the first draft of the NATO. I don't know. I wrote the first draft. I wrote the last draft of the NATO-Russian Basic Act. Things like this. I was in Moscow for over many weeks and months in 1986, 87, 1996, 97, doing this. So I know what we were dealing with at that time. And the Russians who we were dealing with that time were a totally different group. They were from the Yeltsin crowd. They were just as corrupt as Putin is, but they were still a more, shall we say, benignly oriented group. They would say things to us like, wow, we're so happy to be here. You have liberated us from communism. What we didn't realize is that we hadn't liberated them from being Russian and from all of the history that Russia has and all of the anger and bitterness which is in Russian history. That they weren't liberated from. But so we had a pretty good idea what they were thinking and what they wanted to do in 1997. And as late as 2004 or 5, Putin came to Western Europe and gave very positive speeches about how Russia wanted to be integrated with Europe and all that kind of stuff. And then things changed dramatically, and people believe that it might have been because his own political fortunes were weakened by his return to office after a 4-year interregnum necessitated by the Constitution. Now, that may or may not be true, but I'm telling you what the conventional wisdom is.